Hello everybody and welcome to the first part on data modeling. We have a second part which we will follow up on the video, which you should also be able to see below. So when it comes to Power BI, a lot of people start off by going straight into learning some of the more technical sort of coding skills. So you might start to learn Power Query and all the data transformations and the M language that sits behind that. Or you might go away and learn DAX, which is the programming language we use in order to create measures and to create calculated columns. The other things that you can do are kind of more advanced things like Python and R, which are kind of integrated within, can be integrated within Power BI. However, I would argue that one of the most important concepts you should really get your head around is data modeling. And without proper data modeling, I'd argue you cannot be successful in Power BI. And you could say that quantum computing in the future could make this less important, could resolve some of these issues just by the level of data it's able to process a lot quicker for you. However, it is important for now that you really do need to know your data modeling. Okay, so the goals for the session really are for me to express upon you why data modeling is so important, and then look through the different data modeling concepts. So we're going to cover sort of three elements today. The first of these being the star schema design, which deals with facts and dimensions, and I'm going to explain what this is a bit later on, but really facts are the things that you want to, that you're observing, or the events that are occurring, and dimensions are the way in which you want to slice or dice and explain these observations or events. Role-playing dimensions is when you use a one dimension to slice your fact in different ways. And the most common example of this is date. And if you look around online or anywhere else, you'll see a lot of examples of this. And the final concept we're going to look at is something called degenerate dimensions, which is when your dimension doesn't have a dimension table itself, but the dimension sits within the fact table. Okay, so two sort of different examples here of data modeling, and most people will be more familiar with the data model here on the left-hand side. So the single table approach, which is what you would commonly see within Excel, where you have a set of rows and columns. And I'm going to kind of try and express to you that really what you want to be doing and considering is moving across to a many table approach, where you have multiple tables and those tables are interconnected in order to create a data model, a more comprehensive data model. Now, whilst there are advantages of this, there are also some disadvantages. So the advantage of the single table model is that it is more intuitive to build. Okay, it's a lot easier to, when you've just got a set of rows and columns in order to build out your model, because you can sort of see it all quite clearly in front of you. But the many table approach does require a bit of a deeper level of understanding. With that deeper level of understanding, though, you can actually start to process a lot more volume. And actually, there's a really good example of New York taxis, which is dealing with sort of billions of rows of data. And it is just that much more scalable than the single table model. If you think about your Excel, where you've got a million rows, as soon as you start to get above sort of a few 100,000, you start to run into issues. Okay, there's also one of the big benefits is to do with data integrity. So for example, in the single table model, if you've got Europe repeated on multiple times in one column, and one of them has a lowercase e and the rest have an uppercase e, you'll end up with two different Europes in your data. And actually the many table does resolve some of these data integrity issues by the very nature of the way it works. It's important here to point out, however, there's no sort of one right approach to this, and you really have to listen to what your users want and what they want to get out of their reporting requirements. The other end of that scale, apart from what your users want, is also what data you have available to you in the granularity of that data. And you really should consider the number of observations you've got of events, not just now, but in the future. So if your data is 500,000 rows of data now, but you know within the next year it's going to become 2 or 3 million, you're going to want to have a different modeling solution. You might be able to get away with a single table with 500,000, you won't with 2 or 3 modeling, or you're very unlikely to without incorporating some serious issues. And deciding the best method really comes with experience in practice. And actually in the book on the data modeling toolkit done by Ralph Kimball, they talk about it being part art and part science. And I think that's a really good kind of way of kind of expressing what data modeling is. Okay, so now we're going to sort of dive into our Power BI and start looking at our facts and dimensions. I'm just going to explain briefly what facts and dimensions are for those of you who aren't aware before we do this. So your fact table is what sits in the center of your model, and it's the observations or events that are occurring. And this could be a number of things. So you could be monitoring the number of crimes that have been committed, or the number of incidents that have occurred on a single road, stock prices. There's a whole host of different things that you can observe. And then the dimensions are the things that explain those observations or events. So, for example, a police constituency could be explaining the number of crimes committed. All right, so that's generally our view that we look at. So now we're going to pop over to Power BI and we're going to start to build out our own star schema from a single table. Okay, so I've got Power BI open here and we're just going to go and follow get data, and then we're going to bring data in from text/CSV. When we do that, we have the files for date and sales transaction, and there will be in the comments below a link to where all these files are. So firstly of all, we're just going to bring in the sales transactions. And when we double click on sales transactions to bring it in, as always, we get this preview. And as always, we go to transform data. You cannot choose to load your data in directly. However, this is generally not advised. Generally, you always want to have a look at your data before you load it in and check that it's all correct. Okay, so the transform data opens up our Power Query editor, which is where we do sort of our modifications. So here we do all our transformations to our data, and what sits behind this is the M programming language. So we currently have our single table model, and I'm just going to explain a little bit about this single table, and then I will go through the process of converting this into a star schema. So what we've got here is we've got a list of sales transactions and revenue. This is broken down by various different dimensions. So we've got the region, so we've got which region it belongs to, the general ledger accounts. This is whether it's revenue, costs. So general ledger, a bit of a finance term there. We've got the type of transaction. So we might have, for instance, standard transactions, but we've also got returns and credits. We've got customer dimensions, so anything about the customer that we want to know. So if we want to know the customer, the industry they're in, how long they've been trading with us, their name, all sorts of things. And we've got some other dimensions in here as well. So we've got, for instance, item number as well. And I'll go on to explain the different dates a bit later on when we talk about the role-playing dimension. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create all of our different dimensions, and we're going to bring those into our model. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to right click on my sales transactions, and I'm going to duplicate the transaction. And the first one I'm going to build out is my region. So here on the right hand side, I'm just going to change the name here to region. Now, lots of people sometimes put dim region, in fact, transactions, and that's all well and good from a technical point of view, but you've got to remember these names actually appear to our end users. So try and use names which are useful for the end users, and most users won't understand what a dimension and a fact is. So it's best just to use sort of simple terminology, simple business terminology. So the first dimension is just going to contain all the region data. So I'm going to have region selected. And with region selected, I'm also going to select everything else which relates to a region. So I've got here the region name, and I have the region currency. So I'm just holding down Control to select all the different columns, and I'm going to go right click, remove other columns, and there we have my first dimension. And those more astute of you watching the video will see there's a problem here, but obviously I'm going to resolve this a bit later on. So that's our first dimension. I'm now going to build out dimensions for the rest of our data. So for our customers, our items, our accounts, etc. So again, we're just going to repeat the process. So we're going to take the sales transactions. We're going to duplicate this one. This one I'm going to call general ledger, and I'm doing this on the right hand side again where I'm changing the name. And again, I'm just going to select the general ledger account. And I've got an account name and an account multiplier. So that's my general ledger. Again, right click duplicate, and let's bring in our customer details. So our customer details, we have our customer name and our customer industry. So let's remove everything else apart from those two and just change that over to back to our sales transactions again. And let's duplicate it again. And this time we are going to select our item number. And with our item number, we have some descriptive things. We have item range here and item category as well. Okay, so if we just remove the other columns, and we have our items. And I'm just going to call this one product because that's the business terminology in this fictional case. So if we call that product, and the final dimension I'm going to add in is going to be the transaction type. So let's go right click, duplicate again. And with transaction type here, I've got these sort of STD and things, but actually I've got a name here, which will be a bit more useful for my business users, which calls it things like standard return, etc. So I'm just going to change that to transaction type. There are the different dimensions they've got in. I've left the fact, and I've left, the more astute of you will have noticed, I've left an awful lot in the fact table that I'm not actually going to need, but for now I'm just going to leave that as it is. And we'll cover that near the end when we look at the degenerate dimensions. Okay, so I'm going to go close and apply and bring that data into the model, and it's now going to bring it in. Okay, so I have now just selected and built out these dimensions that you can see on the slides. So region with the name and currency, I've got the account, transaction, customer, and item. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange it into this star schema. So I'm going to put the fact table in the middle, the original table, and then I'm going to surround it with the dimensions in order to make this star schema like diagram. Okay, so there's the data. It has now been loaded in. And what we're going to do is on the left hand side here, we're going to go to the data modeling view. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drag it all into one screen. Currently we've got it a bit split out along here. So let's just drag all this along here. Okay. So hopefully you can see all of the tables on the screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put them around it in a star schema like fashion. So as mentioned, we've got our fact table here in the middle, surrounded by all of our dimensions that we've created. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to link up those dimensions to the fact table. And the way we do that, there's a couple of different ways we can do it, but the way I'm going to choose to do it today is I'm just going to take the region, for instance, and I'm going to drag it down onto the region name like so. Now, actually, in this instance, we have a problem. And the problem here, we get this kind of warning message. It's not particularly helpful warning message, but basically we've got a problem of cardinality of many to many, which is basically saying there are multiple regions in both the dimension and the fact table. And this creates what's known as a weak relationship, which actually causes sort of problems with our DAX and can lead to quite a lot of ambiguity within our model. So generally you want to avoid many to many in all but exceptional circumstances. So there's something called a factless fact table. If you come across that in your reading, that's the case when we use many to many. So what we want to do is we always want to create our dimensions. We want to bring them down so there's just a single record of Europe and single record of each region within that. So I'm now going to pop back to the transforming of our data to our query editor, and we're going to adjust it so we have just a single record in all of our dimensions. Okay, so close, so not going to apply that, and then I'm going to go to transform data just here. Okay, great. So transform data will bring me back to this query editor, and then with my region, I'm going to select the region. I'm going to use remove rows and remove duplicates just to give me a single record. Okay, so remove rows, remove duplicates, and now you'll see that we have one Europe, one Middle East, one Africa, etc. And I talked a little bit about data integrity. And if you've got a Europe here with a capital E and a lowercase e, and you've got two of them, here's one of the places where you could clean that up and you could stop that integrity issue. So I'm just going to repeat that process for the other dimensions. So with general ledger, I'm just going to remove the general ledger account, remove duplicates. Customer, I'm going to use the customer number, remove duplicates. Product, I've got an item number, I'm going to remove the duplicates. And the transaction type, I'm going to remove rows and I'm going to remove the duplicates. Okay, and if we just go close and apply, I don't need to wait for that to happen. I know that's going to work correctly. And now it's going to load back in all of those dimension tables back into the model. And now I'm going to be able to build those relationships because I'm going to have a one-to-many relationship. if we go region and we drag region to region, what you'll see is that straight away it's created that relationship without any warning button. And we can see that here we have our fact table, here we have our dimension table, and we've got here the direction of the arrow going from the one side to the many side, which is exactly what we would expect. So let's just link up the rest of our model and to get to our star schema. So the first one I'm going to do is transaction type, just drag that across. Then I'm going to use the customer number, and you can see here I've still got a lot of useless stuff in the fact table. Like I said, I'm going to clean this out near the end, and I'm going to do the same with item number, and I'm going to drag that down to item number, and then I'm going to use account name, and I'm going to drag that across to account name. Now, one of the things that I would always recommend when you do your joining up is to hide the column that you join from. So here we're going from region to region, and my users now can currently select two regions. They can select the region from here, or they can select the region from here. And you always want to enforce that your users select from the dimension table, because the filter direction passes from the region to the sales transaction. If the user selects something from the region here on the sales transaction table itself, it won't filter the region currency and the region name, whereas the region within the dimension table will filter absolutely everything. And the way you can avoid your users from actually selecting the incorrect region is you can just hide it. So when you create the relationship, just hide the corresponding relationship in the fact table. There we go. So region is now hidden within the fact table, and that's now no longer available. And actually, when you go on to use some of the AI features, so natural query language, it will get confused if you've got two regions, whereas if you hide it, you'll be able to then take advantage of the AI features within Power BI and within the Power BI service. So really important to remember to do that. So I'm going to do the same for transaction type, and I'm going to do the same for customer number, and I'm going to do the same for account name, and I'm going to do the same for item number as well. There we go. So I've still got a lot of useless stuff in the fact table, but I've cleaned it up a little bit. So we're now going to go across and just do a little bit of visualization on our data, just to check that it's all working correctly. So if we go up here to the top, there we go. And the first thing we're going to do is we are just going to create a new measure in order to do all of our calculations. It's going to be a very simple measure. We're simply going to sum the amount that's within all of the sales transactions. Now I could just drag it onto the canvas, but I'm going to want to explicitly create the measure. So if I just drag it, that will create automatically the calculation for me. But this is what's known as an implicit calculation, and what I want is to explicitly define what I want. And that's generally good practice, is you don't want to be using implicit measures, you want to be using explicit ones. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to use new measure. And with this new measure, we are just going to create a very simple measure called value. And it's just going to be the sum of amount. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger just so you can all see it. So we've got sum sales transactions amount. So really simple. There's not a lot of complex DAX today. So very straightforward. I'm just going to delete that amount, and I'm just going to use that value column that I've just created in order to build that measure out. There we go. So there we have it. We have our value. Now, what you'll be able to see is that we're able to splice that value in all different ways. So if we go customer and we drag our customer industry onto the axis, so we're dragging our customer industry across here onto our axis just here, you'll see that our visual is updated to show the value by customer industry, and that's all to do with the power of the data model that we've created. Similarly, we could also do the same for region. So if I go region and I drag region onto the axis instead, there we go. We've got it. In fact, I should use region name rather than region. So just drag region name across. So region name onto the axis. There we go. Oh, we have our visual by each region. So there we go. So that's the first part of data modeling, just creating a star schema. And hopefully you can see the data model. It is a star schema-like design that you can see. Obviously, I've done this on purpose to choose to have 5, so it does look a bit more like the diagram itself. Okay, so that's our first sort of concept. The second one we're going to look at now is we're going to look at role-playing dimensions. So role-playing dimensions are really important to consider using. And role-playing dimension, effectively, as I mentioned in the introduction, they create a dimension table that filters our fact table in different ways. So what you'll notice at the moment is we've got one active relationship running from our dimension to our fact. But what you can actually do is you can create loads of different relationships, and you can then make those relationships become active in your DAX calculation itself. So I think in theory this all sounds a little bit complicated. In practice, it's a bit more straightforward when you start doing it. So what I'm going to do just to explain this is I'm going to create a new view here at the bottom. And this is keeping my existing data model, but it's just a separate view of the data. And this is really just, I like to create lots of different views. I find it really keeps my model simple and I can explain it. So I'm just going to rename this one role-playing dimension. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the sales transactions onto the canvas. So I've got all my sales transactions. And I'm now going to bring in the role-playing dimension, which is going to be our date table. So we're going to have to go get data, text CSV, and bring in our date. So see, a lot of you will already have a date table within your organization, but I've just built a standard one for this. So again, we don't just load our data, we always have a quick look at it. So transform data, and this will take us into our query editor again. Okay, so with our date table selected, we now have a pretty standard date table, which has the dates, the year, the quarter, week number, week month, and it's got some other date sort of characteristics there. So very straightforward, and we're just going to go close and apply and bring this date table into our model. Okay, so there we can see our date table has appeared here on the right hand side, and I'm just going to drag it left, so from right to left onto the canvas. And I'm now going to create all the different relationships that I need to in order to use this date, because within the fact table, what we can see is although we have one date table here in our dimension, we've got many dates in our fact table. So for instance, we have the sales order date. We also have the IFRS recognition date and the US GAAP recognition date. So the IFRS recognition date is just an accounting terminology. It's International Financial Reporting Standards, and it's the point at which you can recognize revenue according to those standards. And the US GAAP is just an American US GAAP, which you can use to recognize revenue. And there are subtle differences between the two. And quite often when you have a UK company rolling up to a company in the US, you'll need both accounting standards, two different sort of revenues. So that's why we need those two different dates within our model. There's lots of different reasons why you might need multiple dates. You might have a start and end date, for instance, in a lot of models as well, particularly when you're doing things like stock or inventory or anything like that. Okay, so we're now going to connect up our model. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to do this as we did before. We're just going to drag date to sales order date. And it's created this active relationship, as we've seen with all our other dimensions. So far, no problem. Secondly, we're going to drag date to our IFRS recognition date. And what you'll see is this one has done this kind of dotted sort of relationship instead of this kind of solid line. And if we double click on it, what we can actually see is that the make this relationship active has been unticked, so it's not an active relationship, so it's not filtering the data. If we try and make this active, it won't allow it to do it because we've already got one active relationship and it can't have more than one active relationship at a time. So if we go cancel, and let's just create our other one as well. Let's go date to US GAAP recognition, and all that's going to do is then create the additional inactive relationship. So what's the point in creating these relationships if they're inactive? Well, as mentioned, you can then use DAX to activate them within your calculation. So let's go back to our visual pane and we'll start to show how we can do this. Okay, so I'm just going to create a new page here, and this new page is just going to be called Roleplaying Dimension, just to explain what we're looking at. Oh, it's Roleplaying Dim. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to drag our date onto the canvas, and actually let's drag on our month. And with our month, let's just use a clustered bar chart, why not? And then we'll drag value onto values. So there we have it. We have our value by month currently showing. But which month? Well, we know that the sales order date is the active relationship. So this is done by the sales order date month currently. And actually, one thing that I'm going to want to do before I do this is sort out the sorting, because at the moment it's doing it by value. If I try and order it by month, it's going to do it alphabetically. So you can see it alphabetically there. Let's just sort that problem out before we go any further. So if we go across to our table view, what we can do is we can change the sorting of our data. So you can see here, in fact, if I change it from being alphabetically ascending, you can see that it's doing A's and D's, so it's all alphabetical there from top to bottom. And we don't want that. We know the month should be sorted January to December. Okay, so on the data side, with the date table here selected on the right hand side, we are then going to change the sort order of our months. And we do that by just selecting our month column. And then we have this sort by column, and we can just change sort by to being month number. And you see the month numbers there are 1 to 12, 1 being January, 2 being February, etc. And what that means is when we go back to our visualization, we can now see our data is sorted January through to December. Okay, great. So that's fine. So we've got our sales order date. The question now is, how do we do this? And instead of having our revenue by sales order date, how do we get this by IFRS recognition date? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add on some data labels just to make this a bit clearer on the formatting pane. And I'm just going to add a title in as well. So just down here on the bottom, we've got title. And I'm just going to have it values by month, sales order date. And I'm just going to make that title in the center, and let's put a background color and just make the size a bit bigger. Okay, so that's value by month, sales order date. And if I do Control C, Control V, so copy and paste, and drag that over here, I'm now going to create value, but instead of by sales order date, let's do it by US GAAP. So let's change the title here on the right hand side. Let's do value by US GAAP. Okay, so as mentioned, we now need to write a bit of DAX in order to create this. So we need a new measure up here. And this new measure is going to use the existing measure that we've got, but we're going to use that use relationship in order to change it. So we do need to use calculate in order to do this. So either calculate or calculate table will allow you to do use relationship. So with calculate selected, what we're going to do is we are going to select our value that we've got, and this is the measure that we've already created. So we know what that is. That's just our sum of our amount. But what we're going to do with calculate selected, if we do sum, oh no, I put calculate in the title, which isn't very helpful. So let's call this US GAAP. And now we need to calculate. So apologies about that. So now we've got our calculate. And now here's where we put our value in. And then here is where we start to do our use relationship. So currently calculate value isn't doing anything. It will return exactly the same result that we've currently got. But if we go use relationship, we can then activate that date relationship, that inactive relationship that we've got within our model. So if we go date, and the inactive relationship we want to do is we're going to do the US GAAP recognition date. Make that a bit smaller just so it all kind of fits within one line. Currently it's a bit spread out, so let's just make that a bit smaller just for you to see it. There we go. So we've got the value that we're calculating, and then we're changing the relationship to be between the date table and the US GAAP recognition date in the fact table. So if we now close this down, and where we had value before, we change this value to our US GAAP value. Drag that here. What you'll see, I'll delete the old one, is we now have different figures for January, 25 million, and by US GAAP it's by 28 million. So we can see that that filter is working correctly, and that's how we use role-playing dimensions. And generally we do use it when we're using date as a concept. Now, one of the important things to mention here is when using role-playing dimensions is there is an alternative approach, in which case you could create 3 separate instances of your date table. So you could have one date table which was called sales date, one which was called US recognition date, and one which was called IFRS recognition date. And you could then create a relationship between each of these date tables to their corresponding date within the fact table. And I'll show you how to do that. And that's useful when we want to have one visual which is sliced by 2 different date approaches. Now, there's a few different ways we can sort of create this date table. We could do it within our query editor, but one quite easy way is also to use DAX. So if we go over to our table here, we can very easily make a replication of our date table. And we do that by going across to Home and then New Table. And for instance, if I wanted it to be the US GAAP date table, I would just call it US GAAP date, and then it would just equal my date table. Larger. So all I've done is equals date, which is my date table. Okay, and what you'll see now is that we will have a secondary date table brought into our model. All right, so we have that just there. If you go back to our model, we can then drag our US date table and we can connect that up to our US GAAP recognition date. Just like that. It's not very clear because it's all, there you go. So there you go. So that's the alternative approach. However, I generally would advise trying to start using role-playing dimensions if you can. Certainly from a user perspective, if they've got one date table and well-named measures, it's a lot easier. If they've got lots of different date tables, you can quite easily confuse your end users. Okay, so that's role-playing dimensions. Now we're going to look at the final concept, and this final concept is going to require us to kind of do a bit of cleaning up of our fact table at the same time. So the final concept is degenerate dimensions, and degenerate dimensions, as mentioned right at the beginning, which you've probably all forgotten by now, is that we have a fact table, but we have a dimension that sits within that fact table, and we could make a corresponding dimension for this. However, it's just got one column of data. So in general, we just leave this within the fact table rather than creating a separate dimension. However, it is also worth challenging yourself every time you do this. Okay, so in order to figure out and work out what our degenerate dimensions are, we're going to go back to our model, and actually we're going to need to do a bit of cleaning out of our data because we still have an awful lot of irrelevant stuff within our data. So I'm just going to create a new view, and I'm going to show you what those are. So new view here again, and we're going to call degenerate dimension, and I'm going to drag on the sales transactions. So in terms of things that we've got that are completely irrelevant within our fact table now, we have things like region name and region currency. Don't need those because those are explained by our region. We have customer industry and customer name. Again, those are irrelevant. So let's clean out a lot of these irrelevant ones within our fact table and see what we're left with. Okay, so back to our transform data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean out absolutely everything that we are explaining within the dimensions already. So if I scroll across here on the fact table to the end, I've got it all here, and I've laid this out specifically, but I've got everything here from customer name onwards as irrelevant. So if we just select all of that and remove those columns, that leaves us with only what we need within our fact table. And now I'm going to go close and apply, and we're just going to load that back in. And straight away you can see we've got a lot less columns and a lot more efficient models. And generally this is what we want. We want to create fact tables which are thin, don't have that many columns, but are long. So we have lots and lots of rows, millions, billions of rows of data, but we have few columns generally within our fact tables. It's a bit of a generalization, but that's generally what we're aiming for, because our fact tables are usually our largest tables. Okay, so let's figure out what we need to hide in here. Well, at the moment we've got customer number, item number, region and transaction type all hidden. Okay, and the reason we've got these hidden as mentioned before, and you can see they're hidden by this little sign, is that we've got a corresponding link to our dimension table. We actually have now also done the same for our dates, so we can hide our 3 dates as well. So let's hide our US GAAP recognition date. Let's hide our sales order date. And let's hide our IFRS recognition date, and I should have hidden our general ledger account because that's our link on general ledger, which we have a corresponding general ledger dimension. All of those are now hidden. We've also got amount here, which is the sum of the amount. Now actually we're using a measure for that, so we don't need that within our model either, so we can hide that. And we've also got quantity. We're not doing anything with quantity now, but if we were, we'd use a measure in order to do this, so we won't need the quantity column. And what that leaves is us remaining with 2 degenerate dimensions. We have our invoice number and we have our sales order number. Now, again, I've mentioned at the beginning, it's part art, part science. You could create a dimension for these. So, for instance, an invoice number does roll up to a sales order number, for instance. So one invoice can have many sales order numbers. So you could create a dimension for this. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we are just going to treat these as degenerate dimensions. So if we go across here to the top and back to our visualization, and we're just going to quickly do a little bit of visualization on this. So if we go new page and we call this degenerate dim, and what we can do is if we go across here on the right hand side and look at our sales transactions, and I'm just going to group everything else up so it's a bit clearer. With our sales transactions, we only have 2 available things to select, which are sales order number and invoice number, because we've hidden everything else. You can actually unhide and view everything if you want to by going right click, view hidden, and that will show everything. Okay, so you can still see it, but it won't use it when using natural query language, the AI features, and also it won't appear to the user if they do something like analyze in Excel, which is a really useful feature within Power BI. So what we can now do is we can just take our invoice number, drag it on to our canvas. Let's change this over to a matrix visual here. We want to sum our invoice numbers. Let's put them on the rows. And then we can look at invoice number. And we could, for instance, look at invoice number by value. And there we have it, our invoice number value, which might be something that our users really want to make sure that they look at. So that's degenerate dimensions. Again, I would always think carefully before including those within your models. So those are the 3 aspects I wanted to cover today on data modeling. I hope you can watch the other video in which we will cover some further data modeling techniques. Thank you very much.